The ER doors burst open before anyone could call it in. A man stumbled inside, bleeding heavily, collapsing against the triage desk. Behind him, shouting, footsteps, too many at once. Panic moved faster than protocol. Nurses froze. A doctor backed away. And in the middle of it, quiet, unnoticed, she kept writing. Just another nurse.
New.
Soft-spoken. The one they kept out of the way. Then she looked up. Not at the patient.
At the door.
At the angles. The timing. The silence between the shouts. Something wasn't right. Security hadn't reacted yet. But she already had. When the first armed man crossed into the ER, she didn't flinch. She stepped forward. And everything in the room began to change. They thought she was just a nurse. They were wrong. The night shift began the same way it always did, without ceremony. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent. The emergency department moved in controlled fragments, monitors beeping, stretchers rolling, voices low but constant. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of problems that never really stopped. She signed in without speaking. No one looked up. Her name was on the board, written in black marker among the others.
No title next to it.
No distinction. Just another nurse assigned to another long night. New transfer, right? The voice came from behind the desk. A senior nurse glanced at her briefly, then back at the screen. She nodded once. Yes. I see you. Previously. A pause. A quiet shrug. This is different, the nurse said. Not unkind. Not welcoming either. Just a statement. Stay in your lane tonight. We'll rotate you in slowly. I understand. And that was it. No questions. No introduction. No interest. She moved past the desk, already scanning. Not obviously. Never obviously. Just enough to understand the room. 4 active beds. 2 pending discharges. 1 trauma bay open, but not prepped. Security posted near the entrance, but distracted, leaning slightly too far into conversation. A janitor's cart placed where it shouldn't be, partially blocking a secondary path. Small things. Most people never notice small things.
She did.
She picked up a chart. Bed 3. Male, mid-60s. Chest pain. Stable for now, but trending in the wrong direction. She stepped inside the curtain. Good evening, she said, calm and even. The patient looked up, tired, anxious. Am I dying? Not tonight, she replied. No false reassurance. No dramatics. Just steady presence. She checked his vitals, adjusted the monitor leads slightly, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't optimal. A small correction. The kind that prevents bigger problems later. Her hands moved with precision. Efficient. Controlled. No wasted motion. When she stepped back out, a younger nurse intercepted her. You took bed 3? Yes. That wasn't assigned to you. It is now. The younger nurse frowned. You should check before. He needed monitoring. A brief silence. Not confrontation. Not defiance. Just clarity. The younger nurse hesitated, then nodded.
Fine.
Just let the charge know next time. I will. She didn't explain further.
Didn't need to.
She moved toward the supply station, pausing only once, briefly, near the entrance. The security guard laughed at something his colleague said. His posture was relaxed. Too relaxed. She watched for exactly 2 seconds, then kept walking. At the supply cabinet, she adjusted inventory that didn't belong to her. Syringes placed out of order. Emergency airway kit missing a component, not critical but noticeable. She fixed it quietly. Behind her, voices rose. A disagreement between a doctor and a nurse. Something about bed availability. Something about timing. Normal noise. But beneath it, patterns. The rhythm of the department wasn't quite right. Too many pauses between arrivals. Too much clustering when they did. She glanced at the intake board again. 3 patients logged within 2 minutes. Before that, nothing for nearly 20. That wasn't impossible, but it wasn't typical. She didn't react, just noted it. A stretcher rolled past her, fast. Coming through. She stepped aside before the words finished. The patient on the stretcher was conscious, but barely. Blood pressure dropping. skin pale. She tracked the movement without turning her head. Which room they chose. Who responded? Who didn't? One of the doctors hesitated before giving an order. Another filled the gap. That told her enough. Hierarchy under pressure.
Who leads?
Who follows? Who freezes? She continued down the corridor. Unnoticed again. Exactly where she preferred to be. In the break room, someone had left a television on. News playing softly. Something about increased activity downtown. No details. Just vague language. She muted it as she passed. Back in the ER, the tempo picked up again. Another patient. Another complaint. Nothing unusual. Except, the security guard had moved. Not far, but just enough to leave a gap near the entrance. No one else seemed to notice.
She did.
She adjusted her path slightly, placing herself within line of sight of both the entrance and the central station. Not directly. Never directly. Just enough. A doctor called out. We need help in bed 1. She was already moving before anyone else responded. Inside, controlled urgency. For line slipping. Monitor unstable. She corrected both in under 10 seconds. No announcement. No instruction. Just action. The doctor glanced at her, surprised. Thanks. She nodded once. Nothing more. As she stepped back into the main floor, the automatic doors at the ER entrance slid open. No alarm. No rush. Just a man walking in.
Slowly.
Holding his side. Blood visible now. Not excessive, but deliberate. He didn't look at the front desk. Didn't call for help. He scanned the room instead.
Quick.
Focused. Then moved forward. She watched him for half a second longer than necessary. Not because he was injured. Because of how he carried it. Controlled. Measured. Not panic. Not confusion. Something else. Behind him. The doors hadn't fully closed yet. They lingered open a fraction longer than they should have. A small delay. Mechanical, maybe.
Or not.
She didn't move toward him.
Didn't call out.
She turned slightly instead, adjusting her position again. Closer to the center. Closer to everything. The man reached the desk. Collapsed against it. Voices rose immediately. Get a stretcher, now. Sir, stay with me. Chaos began to form.
Fast.
Natural. Uncontrolled. Everyone reacted. Except her. She was already still. Watching the entrance. Waiting. Because something in the rhythm had just broken. And when it breaks, it doesn't stop at 1. Not here. Not like this. Not tonight. The first rule of an emergency room was simple. Noise meant life. Voices, monitors, movement, constant friction between urgency and control. It was never truly quiet, even in its slowest hours.
But now.
Something inside that noise had shifted. Not louder. Not faster. Just uneven. She stood just left of the central station, hands resting lightly against the edge of the counter. From a distance, it looked like stillness. Like hesitation. Up close, it wasn't. Her eyes moved. Not quickly. Deliberately. The injured man at the desk was already being transferred to a stretcher. 2 nurses, one experienced, one not, struggled slightly with coordination. The doctor leading the intake asked the same question twice. Where were you hit? No answer. The man's breathing was controlled. Too controlled. Even in pain, most people lost rhythm. They spoke too fast or not at all. They clutched the wound, demanded attention, looked for reassurance. This man didn't. He let them work. That was the first inconsistency. She stepped forward just enough to observe the wound as they moved him past. Left side. Lower rib. Blood present but not spreading the way it should.
Contained. Compressed.
Field pressure. Not instinctive. Someone had treated it before he got here. Or he had. Either way, not typical. Get him to Bay 2, the doctor said. Vitals dropping, one of the nurses added. Move. They disappeared behind the curtain. The noise rose again, but her focus shifted away from the patient. Back to the room. Back to the pattern. She turned slightly, eyes landing on the entrance. Closed now. Still. The security guard had returned to position, but not fully. He stood closer to the wall than before, adjusting his belt, gaze drifting too often toward the parking area outside. Not scanning. Watching. Different things. At the far end of the ER, a phone rang.
Once. Twice.
3 times. No one picked it up. That didn't happen often. She walked toward it. Not hurried. Not slow. Just on time. She lifted the receiver. Emergency department. Silence. No static. No background noise. Just open air. She waited 1 second.
2.
Then ended the call. No misdial. No confusion. Someone had wanted the line open, or to see if it would be answered. She placed the receiver back gently. Behind her, footsteps approached. You're covering phones too now? It was the younger nurse from earlier. Slight edge in her voice. Slight uncertainty. They were unattended, she replied. That's not your. They are now. The nurse exhaled, tension sitting just beneath the surface. You don't have to take everything on. I'm not. Another pause. You just keep moving, the nurse said, quieter now. Yes. No explanation followed, because there wasn't one she could give. Not here. Not like this. A stretcher wheel squeaked sharply as it passed behind them. She turned her head just enough to track it. Different patient this time. Female. Late 30s. Breathing fast. Eyes wide.
Panic attack, someone said.
But her hands, they weren't trembling. They were steady. Too steady. Another inconsistency. She stepped aside, letting them pass, but her attention lingered half a second longer. Then she looked up at the intake board again. For patients in the last 5 minutes. Before that, almost nothing. The clustering was tightening. Compressing. Not random anymore. Directed. She moved back toward the supply station, pulling open a drawer. Inside, everything in order. 2 in order. Someone had reorganized recently. Not the usual staff. Different system. Different logic. She adjusted one item slightly. Not to fix it. To mark it. A small shift. Barely visible. Something she could check later. A quiet way to confirm if the room was being touched when no one noticed. Across the ER, voices rose again. Bay 2. The injured man. Pressure's dropping. Get me another line. Where's blood? Controlled chaos. Expected. But beneath it, a delay. Half a second between command and response. Not hesitation. Disruption. She stepped closer. Not into the bay. Just outside. Listening. Watching shadows move behind the curtain. Counting. 1 voice giving orders. 2 responding. A third.
Late.
Out of sync. She turned her head slightly. The third nurse wasn't inexperienced. But her attention kept pulling toward the entrance. Again. And again. Not fear. Not curiosity. Anticipation. That was the second shift. She stepped back. Recentered. The ER doors remained closed. But something beyond them had changed. She could feel it. Not instinct, not guesswork.
Pattern.
Pressure building outside the system. Inside, everything still functioned.
Barely.
But the margin was thinning. At the far end, the security guard stepped away from his post. Just for a second. Just to speak to someone entering from the hallway. He turned his back. Completely. To the main doors. She watched that moment stretch. Too long. Too exposed. Her posture changed. Not visibly. But internally, everything aligned. Angles. Distances. Timing. She shifted 1 step to the right. Now she had a clear line to the entrance, Bay 2, and the central station. 3 points. All she needed. The television in the break room flickered back to life. Sound low. Reports of armed movement, the anchor said. No one reacted. No one heard it. Except her. She didn't turn toward it. Didn't acknowledge it. But it settled into place. Another piece. Not confirmation, but direction. Back in Bay 2, the doctor raised his voice. We're losing him, move. The curtain shifted. A glimpse of the patient's face. Still calm. Still controlled. Even now, that wasn't normal. That wasn't panic. That wasn't shock. That was discipline. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not in suspicion. In recognition, she stepped back again, creating space, not retreating, positioning. The air in the ER felt different now, heavier, not from fear, from imbalance. Too many variables moving at once. Too many things just slightly off. And then, the automatic doors at the entrance made a soft mechanical sound. Not opening.
Not yet.
Just unlocking. Barely audible. Easy to miss. She didn't. Her gaze fixed on the doors. Her breathing slowed. Around her, the ER continued, voices, movement, urgency. Unaware. Unprepared. But she wasn't. Because now, the pattern was complete. And whatever came next was already in motion. The doors opened without urgency. No sudden impact. No forced entry. Just a smooth, mechanical slide, like any other arrival. 3 men walked in. Not together. Not obviously. One entered first, hands visible, posture neutral. He paused just inside, eyes adjusting to the light. A second followed, several steps behind, slower, scanning briefly before lowering his gaze. The third came last, stopping near the entrance, as if uncertain. To anyone else, it looked like hesitation. To her, it was placement. She didn't move, didn't react. Her attention stayed soft, unfocused, like everyone else in the room pretending not to stare. But she saw everything. Spacing between them, deliberate. Line of sight, overlapping. No verbal exchange. No acknowledgement. But they were connected. The security guard turned toward them, offering a routine nod. You need assistance? The first man shook his head lightly. We're fine.
His voice was steady.
Too steady. The guard hesitated, then stepped back. No verification. No question. A gap.
Small.
But enough. The first man moved deeper into the ER, eyes flicking once toward Bay 2, the injured man, then away. The second drifted toward the seating area, hands in his jacket pockets. The third remained near the entrance, watching, holding position, containment. She exhaled slowly. Not fear. Calibration. 3 points of control.
Entry.
Center. Observation. Not random. Not desperate.
Planned.
Behind her, the rhythm of the ER continued. Push another line now. Pressure's not stabilizing. Where's the blood unit? Bay 2 was reaching its limit. The distraction was holding. Exactly as intended. She shifted her weight slightly, angling her body to keep all 3 men within peripheral vision. Still no direct eye contact. Still no acknowledgement. Because recognition changed behavior. And right now, she needed theirs unchanged. The first man stopped near the central station. Close enough to listen. Not close enough to engage. He picked up a clipboard, looked at it, put it down. No interest in the content. Just presence. Establishing normal. The second man sat down briefly, then stood again. Restless but controlled. Testing space. The third, still at the door. Still watching outside more than inside. Perimeter security. Her eyes flicked once toward the security guard. He had turned away again. Focused now on a conversation down the hall. Disconnected. Already removed from the equation. That confirmed it. This wasn't opportunistic. This was timed. Her attention returned to the injured man's bay. Voices rising. Urgency peaking. Clear. A defibrillator charge. The sound cut through everything. For a moment, all eyes turned there. Except the 3 men. They didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't look. That was the third confirmation. Trained focus. Selective attention. They weren't here for the chaos. They were using it. The first man stepped closer to the desk. Busy night, he said quietly. A nurse glanced up, distracted. Always. He nodded once. Then his gaze shifted, briefly, toward her. Not lingering. Not direct. But enough. He saw her. Measured her. Dismissed her. That was fine. Better than fine. Necessary. She lowered her eyes slightly, picking up a chart. Playing the part. Unremarkable. Unimportant. Unseen. Behind the curtain in Bay 2. Again. Another shock. Another attempt. The man on the bed still hadn't spoken. Not once. Not even a word. And now, he wasn't breathing on his own. The room held its breath. Then, got a pulse. Relief moved through the staff. Brief. Fragile. The first man at the desk exhaled. Not in relief. In timing.
He stepped back.
That was the signal. The second man moved. Not quickly. Just enough. Positioning closer to the hallway leading deeper into the hospital. Cutting off internal access. The third man at the door reached into his jacket. Not fast. Not hidden. Just inevitable. She saw the motion begin. Before anyone else did. Time didn't slow. It clarified. Angles sharpened. Sound narrowed. Distance became measurable. Her mind mapped it instantly. Distance to first man, 8 feet. Second, 12. Third, 6. Security guard, out of position. Staff, clustered. Patients, exposed. Exit routes, compromised. No time for instruction. No time for permission. Only sequence. The third man's hand came out. Weapon visible now. Compact. Controlled. Not brandished. Presented. Everyone stay where you are. His voice carried.
Calm.
Firm. Not loud. But it cut through the room instantly. Silence followed. Immediate. Total. A nurse gasped. A doctor froze mid-step. Someone dropped a tray. Metal echoed against tile. The second man turned, pulling his own weapon, covering the hallway. The first remained near the desk, watching reactions, watching control take hold. 3 positions. 3 lines. Complete. The ER was no longer an emergency department. It was contained space. She didn't move, didn't raise her hands,
Didn't speak.
not yet, because movement now, without purpose, would cost everything. The man with the weapon near the door scanned the room. Phones down, he said. No calls. No alarms. A nurse slowly reached for the desk phone. He shifted the weapon slightly. Not aiming. Just enough. She froze. Good, he said. No anger. No urgency. Just control. The first man stepped forward slightly. We're not here for you, he said. Cooperate and this stays simple. Simple. The word hung in the air. Empty.
False.
But effective. Fear settled in. Not panic. Not yet. But close. She let her gaze drift once more across the room. Staff. Patients. Physicians. And then, back to the man in Bay 2. Behind the curtain. Alive again.
Barely.
And suddenly, everything aligned. The timing. The entry. The restraint. This wasn't random violence. It wasn't even about the room. It was about him. Which meant, this wasn't over. Not even close. She inhaled slowly. Still calm. Still quiet. Still just a nurse.
But now.
She stepped forward. 1 step. Measured. Deliberate. Not toward the exit. Not toward the threat. Toward the center. Into the space no one else would choose. And for the first time, she spoke. Not loudly. Not forcefully. Just enough to be heard. If he dies, she said, you lose whatever you came for. The room shifted. Not visibly, but completely. Because now, she wasn't just part of the room. She was part of the equation. And they hadn't planned for that. Silence held for a fraction too long after she spoke. Not confusion. Calculation. The man near the door shifted his attention toward her first. His weapon didn't rise, but it didn't lower either. His eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. The first man, the one near the desk, turned more fully now. You're saying he matters, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer immediately. She let the weight of the room settle first. The fear, the uncertainty, the fragile stillness holding everything together. Then calmly, I'm saying his condition is unstable. Her voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It stayed exactly where it needed to be, clinical, detached, useful. The second man near the hallway took a step closer, tightening the containment without realizing it. His focus shifted briefly from the corridor to her. That was enough. A small gap opened behind him. She noted it, stored it. The first man studied her for a moment longer. You a doctor?
No.
Then stay in your lane. I am. No challenge. No hesitation. Just alignment. A beat passed. Then she added, quietly, if his pressure drops again, he won't make it through another cycle. Not a warning. A fact. Behind the curtain, as if on cue, the monitor tone shifted, subtle, but wrong. A nurse inside Bay 2 spoke quickly. BP's falling again. The doctor responded, sharper now. Stabilize it.
Now.
The timing wasn't luck. It was observation. And now, confirmation. The first man glanced toward the curtain, then back to her. The balance shifted again. You, he said, nodding toward Bay 2. You're with him. It sounded like an order. It wasn't. It was a decision made out of necessity. She accepted it without reaction. Turned. And walked. Not fast. Not slow. Just controlled. As she passed the central station, the younger nurse caught her sleeve lightly. Don't, she whispered, fear breaking through her voice. She didn't stop. Didn't look at her. Keep everyone seated, she said quietly. No sudden movement. The nurse blinked. Who are you? But she was already gone. Inside Bay 2, the air was tighter. More focused. The doctor barely looked up as she entered. We're losing him again. Where have you? She stepped in beside him, already reading the monitors. Heart rate irregular. Blood pressure unstable. Respiration assisted. But the real problem wasn't visible on the screen. She leaned in slightly, checking the wound. Still compressed. Still controlled. Too controlled. This wasn't just trauma. This was managed damage. His bleed is being contained externally, she said. The doctor frowned. We know that. No, she replied calm. It's being limited. He paused. Looked again.
Saw it.
Not random pressure. Directed. Intentional. Who did this? He asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted the dressing just slightly. Not enough to worsen it. Just enough to test response. The patient's eyelids flickered. Awareness. Controlled. Present. Not unconscious. Not fully. That confirmed it. She leaned closer. Her voice dropped, low enough that only he could hear. You stayed ahead of it this long, she said. Don't stop now. No reaction from the others. But his breathing shifted. Just slightly. Recognition. Not of her face. Of her tone. Outside the curtain. Footsteps approached. The first man. He stopped just at the edge. Is he going to make it? He asked. She didn't turn immediately. She finished adjusting the line first. Checked the monitor. Stabilized the immediate variables. Then she faced him. If we keep control, she said, yes. And if you don't, she met his gaze. Steady. Unmoved. Then you lose him. Again, no threat. Just outcome.
He studied her longer this time.
Something in his posture shifted. Less dismissal. More attention. Behind him, the man at the hallway repositioned again. Subtle, but enough.
His angle changed.
His coverage narrowed. Another gap. Still small. Still temporary. But growing. The man at the door remained fixed, watching both inside and outside now. His focus divided. Pressure increasing. Time compressing. The first man stepped half a pace closer to the curtain. Lowered his voice. What do you need? There it was. Not control. Dependence. She answered without pause. Space. He hesitated. Minimal movement. No interference. Let the staff do their jobs. He glanced back at the others. Then nodded once. Do it. The second man stepped back slightly, widening the corridor again. The third eased his stance near the door. Not relaxed, but adjusted. Control redistributed. She turned back to the patient. Didn't acknowledge the shift. Didn't claim it. Because claiming authority made it visible. And visible made it fragile. Instead, she worked. Hands steady. Movements precise. She repositioned the four-line. Adjusted fluid rate. Checked pupil response. All normal actions. All necessary. But beneath them, she was mapping the room, the men, their timing, their coordination, and their limits. The doctor beside her spoke again, quieter now. You've done this before. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. Because the answer didn't belong here. Outside, the ER remained silent. Held. Balanced on a thin line between order and collapse.
And for now,
that line held. Not because of force. Not because of authority. But because she had stepped into it. Without asking. Without announcing. Without permission. And somehow, they had let her.
for now,
The silence outside Bay 2 was no longer accidental. It was managed. Not by fear alone, but by adjustment. Small, deliberate shifts in posture, spacing, attention. The kind of control that did not look like control until it was already in place. She noticed it immediately. Not because it was obvious. Because it was imperfect. And imperfection meant it was still forming. Inside the bay, the patient's condition held, fragile, but stable enough to survive the next interval. The monitor's rhythm had steadied just slightly. Not recovery. Not safety. Just enough margin to keep time from collapsing. She stepped back from the bed. Slowly removed her gloves. Disposed of them without breaking rhythm. Then she looked up. Not at the patient. At the room. Move the crash cart 2 meters left, she said. The nurse beside her blinked. What? 2 meters left. Clear the right side. The doctor frowned. That's not standard placement. It blocks access to the secondary airway kit, she replied.
A pause.
Then she added, calm and precise. And it narrows your exit angle if the corridor is compromised. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Recognition. The doctor didn't argue further.
Do it, he said.
The cart moved. Not dramatically. Just enough. A small shift in geometry. But in a controlled space. Geometry was everything. Outside the curtain, movement changed again. She stepped out.
Slow.
Unhurried. The first man was still near the central station. The second had shifted closer to the hallway junction. The third remained near the entrance, but his stance had tightened. Less scanning, more containment. They were adapting too. Learning the room. She walked past them without acknowledgement. Not defiance. Not submission. Indifference. That mattered more. At the supply station, she opened a cabinet. Reorganized, nothing visible. Instead, she checked what others had stopped noticing. Missing kits. Partially restocked trays. A missing oxygen regulator cap that should have been replaced hours ago. She corrected it. Quietly. Efficiently. Behind her, a voice spoke. You're not following instructions. The second man.
Closer now.
Not aggressive. Observational. She didn't turn fully. I am, she said. You're moving people around. I'm clearing access. For who? For everyone inside this room. A pause. The tension didn't rise. It narrowed, like a lens tightening focus. The first man stepped closer now, joining the edge of the exchange. You're making decisions, he said. She met his gaze for the first time directly. I'm preventing collapse. That answer landed differently. Not as resistance. As function. For a moment, neither man spoke. Because function was harder to challenge than intent. Behind them, the ER shifted again. A stretcher rolled too fast through the corridor. A monitor alarm sounded briefly, then was silenced manually. Someone was losing control somewhere else in the department. Not here, but close enough to matter. She turned slightly. Not toward them. Toward the room. You're compressing the space, she said quietly. The first man narrowed his eyes. Explain. She didn't. Instead, she stepped forward into the center of the ER. Not into cover. Not into safety. Into visibility. Every angle now exposed. Every line of sight intersecting her position. The room held its breath without realizing it. Then she spoke again. If you stay where you are, you control exits, she said. But you also block your own redundancy. The second man frowned slightly. Redundancy? Escape paths, she clarified. A pause. Then, I'm not talking about escape for them, she added. Silence sharpened again. Because now, the implication was clear. She wasn't reorganizing the hospital for safety. She was reorganizing it for survivability under force. The first man studied her longer now. Not dismissive. Not skeptical. Assessing. You're trained, he said. Not a question. She didn't confirm, didn't deny. Instead, she stepped closer to the central station desk and picked up a pen. Turned it once between her fingers. Set it down exactly aligned with the edge of the chart. A small motion. Controlled. Intentional. Then she spoke. Your entry points are stable, she said. But your internal control is not. The second man stiffened slightly. You're guessing, he said. I'm observing. The third man near the entrance shifted for the first time since the breach. A subtle adjustment. Attention split between outside and inside. That was the weakness, not force. Division. The first man raised his hand slightly, not to signal aggression, but to pause the exchange. You're saying we lose control, he said. If nothing changes, she replied.
A beat.
Then, for how long? That question mattered. Not accusation. Not challenge.
Time.
She looked toward Bei too briefly. Then back to him. Not long. The answer was honest. And that honesty changed the weight in the room, because it confirmed something none of them wanted to define. This situation was not stable. It was temporary. And temporary systems fail. Always. The second man exhaled slightly. The first man turned his head just enough to reassess the room again. Not the people. The structure. The spacing. The flow. He was seeing it now. Not her authority. Her logic. She stepped back from the desk. No one moves unnecessarily, she said calmly. And no one panics. The irony was not lost on anyone, because she was not part of their operation. And yet, the room was already following her structure more than theirs. Not fully, not consciously, but enough. A nurse whispered behind the curtain. Who is she? No one answered, because no one had a clean answer. She returned toward Bei too, stopped at the threshold, looked once at the monitors, then spoke without turning. If this continues to degrade, I'll need full access to the corridor outside. The first man responded after a moment. You already have it. That was the shift. Not permission. Recognition. She nodded once. No gratitude. No acknowledgement of hierarchy. Just acceptance of conditions. Inside Bei too, the doctor watched her differently now. Not as staff. Not as junior. As something harder to define. You plan this? He asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Because the answer didn't matter. What mattered was that the room was now arranged in a way that could hold. For a little longer. And in situations like this, a little longer was everything. She adjusted the patient's line again. And the ER outside
Continued to hold its breath.
The ER did not feel like it was under siege. That was what made it dangerous. It still looked functional, staff moving, monitors beeping, voices kept low but active. But the rhythm had changed. Every action now carried awareness of the men controlling the space and the quiet nurse who somehow stood between structure and collapse. She stayed just inside Bei too for a moment longer than necessary. Not because the patient needed it, because the room outside needed time to settle into its new shape. The monitor beep steadied again. Not normal, not safe, just stable within limits. She turned away from the bed. Keep his pressure monitored every 2 minutes, she said. The doctor nodded once. No argument now. Not after the last hour. She stepped out. The corridor outside Bei too had changed. Not physically. Behaviorally. The second man stood farther back now, no longer pressing into the hallway, but still controlling sightlines. The third remained near the entrance, but his attention was split unevenly between outside and inside. The first man stayed near the central station, observing everything with a slower, more analytical focus. They were not relaxed, but they were no longer purely reactive. They were adapting to her structure. She noticed that immediately. Adaptation meant learning. Learning meant time. Time meant vulnerability. She walked past the central station again. No one stopped her. That, more than anything, confirmed the shift. A nurse nearby whispered, "We're just letting her do this?" No one answered, because this had no name yet. She stopped near the supply counter, opened a drawer, checked contents, then spoke without turning. Phone lines are still live internally, she said. The first man's voice came immediately. We already addressed communications. No, she replied calmly. You restricted external calls. A pause. She continued. Internal routing still exists. That means coordination still exists. Silence tightened. She closed the drawer. Turned slightly. You're controlling people, she said. Not the system. The second man shifted subtly in the hallway. That's the same thing, he said. It isn't. Her tone did not change. No emphasis. No challenge. Just correction. She walked toward the central station again. Stopped within the open space where all sight lines intersected. Now she was visible to everyone. All three men. All staff. All movement in the room oriented around her position, whether intended or not. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. If this becomes a containment event, she said, your structure breaks in under 10 minutes. The first man narrowed his eyes slightly. You're confident. I'm accurate. A beat. The third man near the entrance adjusted his stance again. Slightly more alert now. Outside movement mattered less than before. Inside structure mattered more. That was the shift she had been guiding without announcement. The second man spoke again. What do you suggest? The room changed at that question. Not because it was permission, because it was exposure. He had asked for input. From her. She didn't answer immediately. She looked around the ER. Not the people. The geometry. Entrance.
Hallway.
Bay distribution. Blind zones. Security positions still off-axis. Staff clustered too close to central station. No fallback spacing. No layered response structure. Then she spoke. Redistribute control points, she said. No reaction. So she clarified. 2 at the entrance. 1 in the corridor junction. 1 observing internal movement. No overlap in responsibility zones. The first man frowned slightly. You're restructuring our positions. I'm stabilizing your coverage. The word stabilizing landed differently than controlling, because it implied necessity, not preference. The second man exchanged a glance with the first. A quiet evaluation passed between them. Not agreement. Not refusal. Assessment. The first man finally spoke. And you? She met his gaze. I remain where I am. That answer was immediate, unquestioned.
Because it was not a request.
It was a constant. She was not placing herself within their structure. She was anchoring outside it. A separate reference point. That realization shifted something in the room. The first man studied her longer now. You're not staff, he said quietly. No one reacted outwardly. But the tension changed again. Sharper. More defined. She didn't respond. Because confirming or denying would weaken clarity. Instead, she turned slightly toward Bay 2. The patient is stable for now, she said. But only for now. That redirected attention back to the crisis. Back to the reason they were all still here. The second man exhaled slowly. What happens if he collapses? He asked. She answered without hesitation. Then your leverage disappears. Silence followed. Not emotional. Structural. Because now everyone understood the dependency. This entire situation, control, containment, negotiation, was anchored to one unstable biological point. One patient. One variable. Everything else was temporary arrangement. The first man looked toward Bay 2, then back to her. You're making this sound like a system failure analysis, he said. It is. No emotion in the response. Only clarity. The third man at the entrance shifted again. Less aggressive now, more focused. Outside threat awareness remained. But internal instability had become primary. She stepped back slightly. Not retreating. Repositioning. Keep your spacing, she said quietly. Do not cluster.
A nurse blinked.
Why? Because clustered control collapses faster than distributed control. No one argued. Not because they agreed. Because the last hour had proven she was correct more often than anyone else in the room. A distant alarm beeped once from another corridor, then stopped. Someone had manually silenced it again. Control was still present, but fragile. The first man spoke again, quieter now. If we follow your structure, he said, We maintain order. She looked at him. If you don't, she replied, you lose it faster. A pause. Then, he nodded once. Not agreement. Acceptance of probability. Do it, he said. And for the first time, since the breach, their positions shifted. Not dramatically. Not visibly to most. But structurally. The room redistributed itself. Lines changed. Focus points adjusted. Movement patterns recalculated in real time. And she remained still at the center of it all. Not commanding. Not participating. Simply ensuring the system did not collapse.
For now.
The redistribution held, but only on the surface. Beneath it, tension continued to build in smaller, quieter ways. A delayed response here. A misread signal there. A moment of hesitation that lasted half a second too long before someone moved. She noticed all of it, because stability was never a state. It was maintenance. She stood near the central station again, but slightly offset now, no longer the absolute center, but still within reach of every critical line in the ER. The three men had adopted her structure. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough to prevent immediate collapse. The first man controlled the entrance zone. The second held the corridor junction. The third monitored both external movement and internal drift. It was functional, not stable. Functional. And function always demanded payment. That payment arrived in Bay 2. A sudden change in the monitor tone cut through the controlled silence. Not loud, but sharp enough to fracture attention. A nurse called out immediately. BP dropping again, rapidly. The doctor leaned in. We just stabilized. What changed? She was already moving before the question ended. Inside Bay 2, nothing looked different at first glance. But she didn't look at first glance.
She looked at sequence.
The dressing was still intact. The line was still flowing. But the response curve had shifted. She checked the monitor once. Then the patient. Then the four-line. A subtle obstruction. Not complete. Not obvious. But enough. She traced it back in seconds. Compression shift. External containment weakening at the margin. Too small for standard detection. Too precise for accident. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then she spoke. Someone adjusted the pressure manually. The doctor frowned. That's not possible without. She didn't finish listening. Already acting. She pressed gently along the dressing edge. The patient reacted immediately. Minimal movement, but enough confirmation. He was still conscious. Still aware. Still holding.
Barely.
Outside the bay, the first man had moved closer. Not entering. Observing. The second remained at the corridor junction, posture tighter now. The third at the entrance shifted his stance. All three had noticed the change in tempo. Because now, the system was no longer holding evenly. She stepped back from the bed.
Her voice stayed calm.
Someone inside your perimeter interfered with medical stabilization. The first man's expression hardened slightly. That wasn't us. I didn't say it was intentional, she replied. That distinction mattered. And everyone in the room understood why. The ER was now layered. Control layer, medical layer, and something else moving between both. The doctor spoke quietly. If we lose pressure again, we lose him. She nodded once. Yes. No dramatization. No escalation. Just consequence. The second man stepped closer to the corridor edge. Can you fix it? He asked. She looked at the patient again. Then at the environment. Then at the time window forming in front of her. Yes, she said. A pause. But not without exposure. That word changed the room again. Exposure. Risk. Visibility. The first man studied her carefully now. You're saying intervention puts you at risk. Yes. Another pause. The ER seemed to shrink around that statement. Because until now, she had been operating without cost. Correcting. Adjusting. Directing. But not paying. Now she was. The third man near the entrance shifted slightly, scanning outside again, but less certain now. The internal situation was pulling more attention than external threats. She stepped toward the supply station. Opened a cabinet.
Pulled out a sealed kit.
Checked it once. Then closed it. Her movements were precise. Not rushed. Not hesitant. The doctor followed her. What are you doing? Correcting the pressure loss. That requires. I know. No interruption. Just acknowledgement of constraint. The first man's voice came again, quieter now. How long? She didn't answer immediately, because timing now mattered. Seconds mattered. She looked at Bay too. Then at the corridor. Then at the spacing between staff positions. Too tight. Still too centralized. She made a decision.
1 minute, she said.
The room reacted slightly, not visibly, but internally. Because 1 minute in this environment was not time. It was exposure. The second man spoke. You're going in alone. She nodded. No emotion. No hesitation. The doctor stepped forward. That's not safe. She interrupted gently. It's controlled. That word again. Controlled. But this time, it had weight. Because control now required cost. She stepped into Bay too. The atmosphere changed immediately. Not because the room changed, but because responsibility concentrated. She moved beside the patient, checked the line again, then spoke softly.
Hold steady, she said.
Not instruction. Not reassurance. Alignment. Then she adjusted the dressing. This time, deliberately. Pressure redistributed. Flow corrected. Risk increased. Outside the curtain, voices tightened. The first man stepped closer. Is it working? He asked. She didn't look up. Yes. A pause. Then, the monitor stabilized again. Not fully, but enough. The doctor exhaled quietly behind her. Relief. Temporary. Fragile. But real. She stepped back from the patient. The cost had been paid. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But internally. She had committed to direct intervention under observation. Now they had seen it. All of them. And that changed perception. The first man looked at her differently now. Not as structure. Not as anomaly. As necessity. You took a risk, he said. She met his gaze. Yes. Why? A pause. She looked back toward Bay too. Because the patient still mattered. Because the system still mattered. Because collapse was not theoretical. It was immediate. But she didn't say that. Instead, because waiting wasn't an option. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Understanding. The second man stepped back into position. The third adjusted near the entrance again. The structure reformed. But something had changed. She had stepped beyond coordination. Into consequence. And now, they knew she could. Which meant the next time, they would expect her to. She returned to her position near the central station. Still quiet. Still controlled. But no longer invisible. The system had recognized her. And systems like this never forgot the ones who kept them from breaking. Even if those people never asked to be seen. The ER had settled into an uneasy structure of control. Not calm. Not safe. Structured. Every movement now had intent behind it. Staff watching angles they never used to consider. Security repositioned according to her earlier instructions. And 3 armed men maintaining coverage that no longer felt fully theirs. But control built under pressure always developed cracks. The first sign was subtle. A change in sound outside the department. Not inside. Outside. Distant footsteps. Measured. Coordinated. Different from panic. Different from medical rush. The third man at the entrance noticed first. His posture tightened. He adjusted his stance, shifting weight toward the door. The second man near the corridor followed a second later, eyes narrowing, scanning internal reflections in glass panels, recalibrating attention outward. The first man looked at her. Not the room. Her. That was new. You expecting someone? He asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Because she wasn't the source of the shift. But she recognized it. Patterns within patterns. Response timing. Spacing. Movement discipline. Not random. Not civilian. She spoke calmly. No. A pause. Then she added. But someone is already aware. That changed the room. Not emotionally. Operationally. The second man stepped closer to the corridor edge again. What does that mean? She didn't look at him. External escalation response time is no longer theoretical. The words landed differently now, because they implied something beyond the hospital, beyond their control structure, beyond negotiation. The first man's voice lowered. Law enforcement? She didn't confirm,
Didn't deny.
just observed. That level doesn't arrive without coordination. Silence tightened, because now the room understood something unspoken. This was no longer contained. It was being measured. Outside, then inside, then everywhere at once. A faint sound came from the hallway ceiling speaker system.
Static.
Then silence again. Someone had cut audio routing, or overridden it. The third man at the entrance shifted again. But this time, he didn't look outside. He looked in, at her. That shift mattered more than the others, because it meant attention had moved from perimeter to anchor. The first man followed his gaze. "You're not surprised," he said. She met his eyes. "I accounted for it." That answer changed something again. Not the situation, the perception. Because accounted for implied preparation, not reaction. The second man narrowed his eyes slightly. "You expected this?"
No.
A pause. Then she corrected softly. "I expected escalation." That distinction mattered. Escalation was inevitable. Form was not. Behind them, the patient in Bay 2 remained stable, but barely. The system was holding again. But now it was irrelevant to the shift happening outside. The first man stepped slightly closer. "You're not hospital staff," he said again. This time, less question. More confirmation. She didn't respond, because the truth was no longer useful. Only positioning mattered now. The ER doors at the far end made a soft mechanical sound. Unlocking. Not opening. Just readiness. The sound carried. Everyone heard it. No one moved. The third man adjusted his grip on his weapon. The second repositioned to cover corridor and entrance simultaneously. The first turned slightly toward her again. "Talk to me," he said quietly. That was new. Not command. Not control. Coordination. She looked at the entrance. Then at the spacing between all three men. Then at the ER staff, still frozen, still waiting for direction they no longer understood. Then she spoke. "Your containment structure is about to be challenged externally," she said. No reaction. Then she continued. "And your internal cohesion is already compromised." The second man frowned slightly. "That's not true." She didn't argue. Just stated. "One of your positions is no longer fully aligned with your objective." Silence. The third man near the entrance tightened slightly. Not outwardly, but enough. The first man noticed.
So did she.
That was confirmation. She didn't expose it further. Not yet, because exposure creates rupture, and rupture creates collapse. Instead, she stepped slightly closer to the central station again, recentering herself in the geometry. Not authority, stability. "I am not your target," she said calmly. No one responded, because that statement reframed everything. She continued. "But I am currently the only reason this environment has not already failed." The room absorbed that. Slowly, reluctantly. Then, a new sound. Outside. Clear now. Multiple vehicles. Not ambulances. Not hospital response. Coordinated arrival. The third man looked toward the door again. This time, uncertain. The first man's voice lowered. "Who are they?"
She paused.
Just once. Then answered. "Your escalation." That was all. No explanation. No expansion. Because it wasn't needed. The ER had already understood what that meant. The second man took a half step back. Not retreat. Recalculation. The structure they had built inside the hospital was now intersecting with a structure outside it. And those two systems did not share rules. The first man looked at her longer now. Something different in his expression. Not control. Not suspicion. Recognition of dependency. "You knew this would happen," he said. She finally shook her head once.
No. A pause.
Then, "I knew it would trigger it." That was worse. Because it meant this wasn't reaction. It was chain response. The ER doors unlocked again. This time, audible. Final. The sound echoed through the corridor like a countdown without numbers. The third man stepped fully into defensive posture. The second aligned to corridor sight line. The first turned slightly toward her, not away from threat, toward her, because in his calculation, she was no longer inside the system. She was adjacent to it, and anything adjacent to collapse becomes part of its center. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the door, waiting, not for chaos, but for confirmation. And when it came, everything inside the ER would be forced to choose a side. Even her. The ER doors did not explode open. They opened with discipline. That was the first correction in the room's assumptions. A coordinated tactical unit entered. No rush, no chaos, just controlled spacing. Their movement was deliberate, structured, built on repetition. Not panic response. Not improvised reaction. Professionals. The air inside the ER tightened instantly. Not louder. Heavier. The three armed men shifted at once. The third man at the entrance adjusted first, weapon raised slightly, not fully aimed, but ready. The second man in the corridor reoriented to create a crossline. The first man near the central station stepped half a pace back, recalculating geometry in real time. Control inside the room fractured into two systems. External command, internal containment, and neither immediately aligned. The lead tactical operator stepped forward just inside the threshold. Helmet off. Eyes scanning. Not random scanning, targeted. He saw the patients, the staff, the armed positions. Then he saw her. And paused. Just for a fraction of a second. Not surprise. Recognition of structure. The room noticed that pause.
So did she.
That pause meant she was already in their internal mapping. Before she spoke. Before she moved. Before anything else. The second man from the armed group called out sharply, "Stay back." The tactical unit did not respond immediately. They didn't rush. They didn't escalate. They assessed. The lead operator lifted one hand slightly, not surrender, not aggression. Control signal. Hold positions, he said to his team. Then his eyes moved again. Back to her. The entire room followed that line of sight. Not because she demanded it. Because he did. She didn't move. Didn't react. Just observed. Because now the situation had crossed the threshold she had been tracking since the first pattern deviation. Containment had become convergence. The first man from the armed group spoke, voice controlled but sharper now. This is a medical containment situation. No response from the tactical team. The lead operator took one step forward. Then stopped. His gaze locked again on her. Clear the central line, he said, not to his team. To the room. Not command. Correction. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because the tactical unit did not treat the armed men as unknown chaos. They treated the room as already partially structured. And they were aligning to that structure. The second man from the armed group hesitated. Just briefly. That hesitation was enough. The tactical operator raised his hand slightly. A signal passed. Two members of the unit repositioned, not toward him directly, but around him. Cutting angles. Removing options. Not confrontation yet. Containment geometry. The first man from the armed group turned his head slightly. He understood. They were losing positional advantage. Not through force. Through mapping. And then, the lead operator spoke again. Who is coordinating internal movement? Silence. Every staff member instinctively looked somewhere else. Not her. Not immediately. Because naming her would finalize something no one was ready to finalize. But the pause itself answered. The operator's gaze returned to her. Longer this time. He stepped forward. Stopped 3 meters away. Identify yourself, he said. The room waited. The armed men watched. The staff froze. Even the patient monitors seemed louder in comparison. She didn't answer immediately. Because identity was no longer simple here. If she answered as nurse, she would be dismissed. If she answered as something else, she would become a target. Instead, she spoke carefully. Medical staff, she said. The operator didn't react outwardly, but his eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't complete. Not sufficient. The first man from the armed group spoke again, faster now. She has been directing movement since the breach. That changed the air. Not accusation. Confirmation. The tactical unit shifted slightly, not aggressive, but reevaluating her role. The operator looked at her again. Is that accurate? She met his gaze. Yes. One word. No justification. No defense. Just truth. A long pause followed. Then the operator spoke again. Medical override remains with hospital authority, he said. Then, after a beat, you are currently acting as operational coordinator. The word landed heavily. Coordinator. Not nurse. Not hostage. Not bystander. Coordinator. The second man from the armed group stiffened slightly. That's not. The tactical unit moved half a step. Not toward him, but enough to stop the sentence. Silence again, but now structured differently. Not fear. Alignment forming. She exhaled slowly. Not relief. Adjustment. Because now, everything depended on whether that classification held. The lead operator turned slightly toward his team. Maintain perimeter control, he said. Then back to her. Talk me through current internal status. The room shifted again, because now she was no longer isolated. She was being integrated into a command loop. She looked briefly toward Bay 2, then the corridor, then the entrance. All critical patients are stabilized but vulnerable, she said. 2 internal control points remain active. 1 breach group is still fragmented but coordinated.
She paused,
then added, internal system is stable only under current structure. The operator nodded once. That mattered, because he understood what she was saying. Stability was conditional, not guaranteed. The first man from the armed group looked between them. Something in his control was slipping. Not through force, through redefinition. The tactical unit wasn't replacing his authority. They were reclassifying it. And in that process, she had become the reference point. The operator stepped slightly closer. Continue maintaining internal stabilization, he said. Not order. Not request. Confirmation of role. She nodded once. No hesitation. The armed group's second man shifted again, but this time, the tactical unit mirrored him immediately, neutralizing movement space, without escalation. Control was no longer one-sided. It was layered, and she stood at the intersection of both systems. The first man finally spoke, quieter now. This was never just a hospital, he said. She didn't respond, because it wasn't a question. It was realization. The operator glanced at her again briefly, then issued his final instruction for now. No one moves without coordination, he said. And just like that, the ER stabilized. Not peacefully, not safely, but structurally. And she remained at the center of it. Not as a patient, not as a target, but as the only consistent point in a room that had stopped being one system and become several. Morning arrived without announcement. No cinematic shift. No dramatic silence breaking. Just a slow change in light through the high hospital windows. Pale, tired daylight replacing the artificial intensity of the night shift. The ER was still functioning, but it no longer felt like the same place. Cleaners moved carefully between equipment. Nurses spoke in low, measured tones. Security presence had changed, more formal now, less improvised. Tactical personnel were gone, but their structure still lingered in how people moved through space. Everything had been documented. Everything had been reviewed. Everything had been stabilized. Except her position. She stood near the supply station, restocking what didn't need to be restocked. A habitual action. Controlled. Quiet. No one approached her directly. Not anymore. There was distance now, not physical but procedural. A doctor passed behind her, hesitated, then continued walking without speaking. A nurse looked at her once, then looked away too quickly. Even the senior staff avoided direct engagement, as if acknowledging her would require a category they had not yet agreed on. She finished aligning a tray. Perfect spacing. Exact order. Then stopped. The ER doors opened briefly as a stretcher passed through. Routine now. Controlled. No urgency. Life returning to its normal rhythm, carefully rebuilt over the bones of what had happened. but she did not belong to that rhythm. A man in a dark coat entered through the side corridor. Not uniformed, not tactical, administrative. He stopped a few steps away. Waited. She noticed him. Did not turn immediately. When she finally did, he was already watching her closely. "You're requested for a debrief," he said. Not questioned. Stated. She nodded once. No resistance. No surprise. He glanced briefly at the ER behind her, the controlled chaos, the rebuilt order, the quiet tension still embedded in the space. Then back to her. "There are differing accounts of last night," he said. "There always are," she replied. A pause. He studied her longer now. "You remained inside the structure the entire time," he said. "I remained where I was needed." Another pause. He looked down at the file in his hand, but didn't open it. "You understand this situation is under federal review." "I assumed it would be." That was all. No reaction. No emotion. Just alignment with inevitability. He exhaled slowly. "They've marked you as critical incident coordinator." She didn't respond immediately, because labels always arrived late and rarely fit. After a moment, she said, "That is not a role I requested." "It is not a role you applied for," he replied. Silence followed. Not tense. Final. Behind them, the ER continued to move, patients arriving, staff rotating, systems resuming normal flow as if nothing had permanently changed. But something had. And everyone knew it. The man closed the file. "You'll need to provide a full account," he said. "I will," she replied. Another pause. Then he added, quieter now, "Most people in that room did not understand what happened." She looked back toward the ER. "I don't think they were supposed to." That answer lingered longer than the question. He nodded once, then stepped aside. "After this," he said, "you can leave." A simple statement, but heavy, because it implied she had been held, if not physically, then structurally. She walked past him, through the corridor. No urgency. No hesitation. The hospital noise faded slightly as she moved away from the ear, still present, but no longer surrounding her. At the exit, she paused. Just once. Not looking back fully. Only enough to register the space behind her. The controlled chaos. The stabilized system. The aftermath of decisions no one would fully write down the same way. Then she stepped forward. Outside, the air was cooler, quieter, normal. But she did not immediately move on. She stood for a moment on the hospital steps, adjusting her coat sleeve. A small, precise movement, like closing a file no one else could see. Behind her, the hospital doors opened again. Someone called her name, uncertain, hesitant. She did not turn. Not because she didn't hear it, because it did not require a response. A pause. Then silence. The doors closed again. And she walked away. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just steadily. Like someone returning to a life that had never fully stopped waiting for her to leave the part she never asked to enter. And behind her, the hospital continued functioning, as if it had always known how to survive the night, even if it never understood who had quietly held it together. End.